My name is Amy Forbes. I'm a junior, and I looked at the anonymity factor of the internet, and specifically focusing on Twitter. And underneath it, I put hashtag "Does your mother know you said that?" The anonymous factor questions whether or not people are more comfortable using vulgar language online versus what they would do in a face-to-face confrontation with what they're responding to online. And then also what trends commonly appear throughout this use on the internet. And then finally, what is the actual effect of that anonymous factor on what they're writing and how comfortable they are and how they utilize their Twitter or any other form of digital media that they have. I'm going to apologize because it was a presentation on vulgarity. There are vulgar words involved. I'm sorry. To the left-hand side, you'll see that there are the words selected, and then the subject requirements to be entered into the study is I went through different Twitter posts and searched for the base word of the word selected, and off of each word I chose 3 individuals who only used the base word once in a post. They had to be between 15 to 22 years of age and had to be verifiable via Facebook. And then each of those 3 subjects received their own corpus for that word. So each of the 30 subjects had their own corpus, and then finally it was all compiled into one large corpus at the end. So there's an individual study as well as an overall study to help better see the different trends that show up when people are using vulgar language / phrases when they're using digital media. Over the course of 2 weeks, I started compiling the corpuses. However, I did backtrack further than 2 weeks so that I would have a large enough corpus to work with. As far as their Twitter streams would allow me to go back, I went and I highlighted every single post so as to not leave anything out that could throw off the amount of use they did for their base word or any other vulgar phrase used in this experiment. The final data was compiled into charts for each of the individual subjects, as well as an overall graph showing the amount of use for each of the words for the overall context that we used. Specifically for this, just based off of time, I'm going to talk about subject 1. Subject 1 was a junior at a university in Southern California. The base word that I used for her was the F-bomb. Start off with just because you cheated on me, I'll never ever give any fuck you know me, I'm the least person that you want to mess with, I'm happy without you, happy face. From there, I went on and collected all of her data, compiled it into a chart, and then selected one of the other phrases that would possibly be considered vulgar or maybe not certainly appropriate in certain situations, which was one of her actual retweets from another site that said, "Condoms are like parents, they're there to protect you, but usually it's more fun when they're not around." And then finally, the last selection I made for her corpus on the last day that I was doing this was banana smoothie on a summer night. I just love having my little Jamba Juice world at home, making my own smoothie equals more variety for the win. So I think that really, that collection of different tweets really shows just the variety of things that this individual is talking about specifically and how it changes throughout. Like, the first text is obviously, you can see that she's very aggravated and uses more texties versus full written language, and then moving throughout that. If you look for her corpus, each individual subject's corpus was around 500 to 800 words, depending on how active they were in their Twitter account. The first subject, she was 609 words. She never used damn it, which was what I ranked. I also created a rank scale of like words from like the least offensive to the most offensive to make those brackets to see how often they were used and if the severity or like the perceived severity that society has for each individual word would affect their use. She chose to never use out of all of her tweets damn it or cunt ever. However, every single other word she utilized in her tweets. Minimum being 1 for corn chip, and then she also used GTFO, which I originally wasn't going to include in the study, but I noticed it appearing quite frequently throughout Twitter, and since it is a focus on texties and it is specific text language, I thought it would be interesting to see how many times it is actually used. In relation of subject 1 to the full corpus, as you can see from the 10 words and the 30 different subjects, I had almost 1,100 word or 11,000 word full corpus. The most popular word out of all of that being bitch, which I noticed was quite a bit used in derogatory form towards women, but also used by women to derogatorily go after their own friends, or like someone took someone's boyfriend. Like, it was just a lot of anger surrounding that word. But then also there were times when it was used as like a term of endearment, which I thought was very interesting, because after I went through and used the Anonymity program to find out the amount of used in relation to the corpus, I went through by hand through each set of text or tweets from each individual subject to see what the actual context of the tweets was. Subject 1 specifically had a very close relationship with one of her friends, who she then found out cheated on her boyfriend, and it was very unhappy. But she used Twitter as an outlet of communication with this friend rather than like a personal confrontation. They were tweeting back and forth at each other about this incident, and then the boyfriend got involved, and so they were all just tweeting at each other. And it went from, one of the phrases she used was, gonna go see my favorite bitch tonight, and then her friend's name, and then after that it was like, you're a horrible bitch, and just kind of going off on her. So from that, and especially as you can see from the full corpus, with just the amount, out of the relatively small corpus I have, the amount of times certain vulgar words are used, what I really think we need to address, which is what this entire presentation is addressing, is the anonymous factor. Like, the comfort level that subject 1 specifically, and many of the other subjects too, had with using just what in normal, everyday speech you would never hear come out of anyone's mouth, but just back and forth in possibly the most public forum they could find. Like, there's this feeling of safety and security that I noticed trending throughout all of the tweets that I looked at, that there was no sense of consequence. There was no one that was going to come after them for what they said, except for the person they were tweeting at, but that's via the internet, and if they didn't like that tweet, they could respond with an equally harsh tweet, or just stop responding in general. I actually started looking into a bit of psychology off of this, because it was such a strange factor, the anonymous factor. It's actually defined by psychologists as de-individualization, which also is more commonly known as the mob mentality, and falls under the social psychology, where it's generally thought of when you're in a large group, there's a loosening of like personal responsibility. People stop responding to certain situations as they would if they were alone, but rather they respond to it with this I'm not in charge, it's not my responsibility kind of attitude. Real life instances are Abu Ghraib and the Nazis during the Holocaust. Specifically, the Nazis during the Holocaust, a lot of the military officers who were interviewed afterwards said, well, if I had been doing something wrong, I thought that my commander would have told me. And so it was this diffusion of self-responsibility and this ability to then not fully think through what your actions are causing or what you're actually saying or doing. Obviously, angry tweets are nowhere near the level of Abu Ghraib and the Holocaust. However, it's that same concept, just on a much smaller scale, and it's actually been looked at quite a bit in a lot of different psychology cases recently, as well as the media. In conclusion, all of these facts that come in, the importance of the anonymity factor and then de-individualization in the context of Twitter specifically, but also Facebook and any other digital media that you come across, is that the feeling of safety correlates to the public platform that it's on. As we've discussed this entire semester, people are becoming more and more comfortable with using digital media to make themselves heard with their political opinions, their religious opinions, their opinions on, you know, diet, life, anything, and they're willing to stand up and not privacy protect their Twitter, not privacy protect their Facebook, and say these things that not only correlate to vulgar phrases that, you know, potential bosses could see, your parents could see, and, you know, in regards to Lindsay's presentation on underage drinking, just this very comfortable factor with this is who I am, this is what I'm going to say what I want, when I want, and how I want, and rather than it being somewhat in private where it may not come back to haunt you, this is an incredibly public platform that is essentially permanent. So what you said when you're 16 to 22 years old could come and find you when you're much later on in life, and possibly you don't want people knowing that you were saying those things, because what would your mother think? And then from that, I want to ask the question how it affects our online communication. And I don't know if any of you watched Saturday Night Live, but a couple years back there was a Saturday Night Live skit where they had 3 people who were internet commentators, and they were asking them, like on this talk show, like about what they comment and why they comment. And I thought a really good line from their interviewer was, because no one knows who you are and there are no consequences. And like supposedly the internet commentator goes, yeah, exactly. And he goes, because you're never going to see this person. He goes, exactly, I can say whatever I want. And I just think that's a really interesting concept from everything that we've covered this semester, is that you can essentially get away with saying whatever you want on the internet with very little or no consequence. And specifically just looking at this, you know, small pool of individuals, it really shows that there is a certain level of comfort in that anonymous factor. And then also what I wanted to talk about is like the acknowledgement of this anonymous factor. Like we did talk about it briefly in class, and there were, we did read a little bit on it. But the fact that it is recognized and that we see that there is this anonymous factor and that people are more comfortable saying things on the internet, and especially being safe on the internet. I know that one of the last articles we read from Barron was just like using online media responsibly plays into this in a very big way, because you have to think about what you're saying and doing, because you do see the examples of people who say something that society deems inappropriate, and they may not get, per se, in trouble for it, but they are called out on it once in a while. So I thought that was really cool. So thank you very much.